Hello and welcome to episode 7 of Listen Up, Behaviour podcast. And this evening we've got Marc Buchanan from Alcohol Focus Scotland. Hi Marc.
Thanks for having me.
And just before we go into Marc, for everybody listening, we really would be grateful if you could subscribe to our YouTube channel or stream us on all major platforms, Spotify, Apple, iTunes, etc. So this week we've got Marc Buchanan from Alcohol Focus Scotland. So Marc, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming along. First of all, what is Alcohol Focus Scotland and what work do you do?
So Alcohol Focus Scotland are the national alcohol charity in Scotland, and we essentially work to reduce the harm caused by alcohol in Scotland. So the way we do that is we both are informed by academia and academic studies that are coming out, but we're also informed by the voices of lived experience and people who've been impacted by alcohol. We also help to give information to people in the media, decision makers, the general public on alcohol that will hopefully help inform some of their decisions and make sure they know a bit more about alcohol. And the other thing we do, or we have done in the past, is offer training to like workplaces, going to schools, and just making sure that people know enough about alcohol to make some informed choices.
Thanks, Marc. And we first met up through our work, you know, and you spoke there about kind of coming out and speaking to people with lived experience with alcohol issues, and you come over to our aftercare group at Abbey Care, and you did a bit of kind of research regarding that and stuff. So we really want to thank you for involving our clients with Abbey Care. So you work in the involvement team at Alcohol Focus. So what areas does the involvement team look at?
Yeah, so there's 3 sort of main areas that we have been involving people in our work. So these 3 areas are really to try and reduce the harm caused by alcohol in Scotland, and we feel that these are the 3 main areas that would be best to focus on as part of the World Health Organisation's kind of best buys. So the first one is alcohol marketing. So we've been going out and speaking to people with lived experience and the families of those impacted by alcohol and young people, and speaking to them about alcohol marketing and how it impacts their life. So that's the first sort of main sort of channel that we've been speaking to people about. The second thing is around price and minimum unit price. So speaking to people about how the price of alcohol might impact the kind of consumption, and finding out about, you know, if we were to make more money from alcohol, if supermarkets and retailers to make more money from alcohol, where would they like to see that money be allocated to, and where would best improve their life? So that's the second kind of area. And then the third one is around availability. So, you know, where you can purchase alcohol, the times you can purchase alcohol. And as I'm sure you're aware, there's certain areas of Scotland where there is a large amount of outlets in a very small space on certain high streets in Scotland where you can buy alcohol. So just finding out about how things like that impact people's recovery and day-to-day life. So they're the 3 sort of main areas that we work across.
Perfect. So if you could speak to a wee bit to us about what do you mean by alcohol harm?
Yeah. So alcohol harm can take on a number of can look a number of different ways. So you've got things like obvious things like health harms. So you know, we know that there is around about 200 different health conditions that can be exacerbated or caused by alcohol. And you know, people who have already got a health condition, we know that it can be worsened by consuming alcohol. So you've got the health harms. You've also got things like, you know, the economic costs. You know, the cost to the healthcare, NHS from the fallout from the damage that alcohol can cause. You've then got, you know, societal costs. So, you know, like crime and the cost that, you know, alcohol costs through that. And then you've got the harm to others. So that can be where somebody's perhaps dependent upon alcohol and perhaps shows certain behaviours that maybe put others at risk, like family members and, you know, domestic violence, things like that. So there's a number of different ways that harm can show itself with regards to alcohol. But I think it's important when we speak about alcohol harm, we sometimes think of it being framed as an issue with dependent drinkers. But really, when we speak about alcohol harm, it's about improving the life of the whole population. So it's not, we don't want to just look at dependent drinkers as being the issue. We want to look at it as being, people who aren't dependent are still causing harm to themselves by consuming alcohol.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of what we mean by alcohol harm.
Yeah. So why don't we hear too much about alcohol rates of death compared to the drug death rates in Scotland? Because there's been a massive emphasis over the last 7 or 8 years regarding Scotland being the drug death capital of Europe, certainly. And there's been a lot of kind of investment and focus and emphasis on that. How do we relate with alcohol deaths in Scotland?
Yeah, so alcohol kills 50 people per week in Scotland, so it's a huge issue. I think relating back to drugs, I think obviously the obvious thing I would say is the legality. Obviously, drugs like heroin and cocaine are illegal, whereas alcohol is legal. And I think with that there comes that certain stigma that because it's illegal, alcohol is legal. There maybe hasn't been as much emphasis on it, and it's maybe viewed a little bit differently. I think Scotland's culture around alcohol is perhaps different from most, if not any other country in the world, in terms of the way we treat alcohol, the binge drinking involved in this country. So I think there's that years of historical almost acceptance of alcohol that it's just part of our lives, and it just needs to be part of our lives, and there's no alternative. So I think that's perhaps why it's viewed a bit differently from drugs. But as an organisation, we want to ensure that alcohol is a focus for decision makers as much as drugs are, because a lot of the time it seems to be put down the list of priorities in favour of drugs. And obviously drugs is a huge issue as well. But we want to ensure that it remains on people's radars, I think.
Yeah. So I think the Scottish drug deaths rates were released last week. It was last Tuesday morning. I think it was 1,117 deaths, and that was, as I said earlier, that's the highest again in Europe for 7 or 8 years.
Yeah,
kind of running. And you gave us the figures there of 50 deaths per week for alcohol. So try to work out things quickly here, but that's 200 deaths a month.
Yeah,
2,400. 2,400 a year. So that's over double.
Yeah.
But we don't have as much focus on that. And obviously, you spoke there as well about Scotland's kind of unhealthy relationship with alcohol. What do we see different by our attitude towards that? We were speaking earlier about maybe other countries where alcohol was more kind of readily available and there's not much kind of too much emphasis on it. Maybe countries like Italy, France, Spain, where families could have a nice bottle of wine along with their dinner.
Yeah.
So what is so different with our relationship, do you feel? And you spoke there about binge drinking.
Yeah.
What do we know about this?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I'd like to say is that 1 in 5 Scots regularly exceeds the 14 unit weekly guidelines. So it's not just a small problem; it's a huge proportion of the population. I think that what I would say is that I think that everything in this country seems to revolve around alcohol, whether it's going to gigs or any sort of socialising.
Yeah.
If you don't do it with alcohol, you're seen as being the exception. Whereas I don't think I don't know for certain, but I don't think that's the case in a lot of other countries where it would raise as many eyebrows if you weren't to say you weren't drinking. So you're dealing with years and years of that being the culture in this country. So it's no small task to try and get people to see it a bit differently. And I suppose we'll talk about it hopefully a bit more later, but things like the alcohol marketing of the marketing of alcoholic products in this country, it leans into that whole, you see the posters and you'll see 5 or 6 people around a table socialising and having a laugh, and it's almost like that's not possible unless you bring alcohol into the mix and you're
Okay.
drinking alcohol. So things like this all tie into this image of alcohol having to be part of everything we do in this country. So it's tough.
So you spoke about the 3 areas there, and you touched there on alcohol marketing.
Yep.
Then we spoke about going to speak about minimum unit pricing. Then availability. So, what is Scotland's kind of trends regarding marketing? How have we how have we did that over the years, and what's the kind of model now?
Yeah. So in terms of alcohol marketing, it's one of these things that's quite hard to quantify exactly just how many folk drink alcohol because of alcohol marketing.
Yeah.
But what we definitely can say is that through the involvement work we've been doing in recent years, we hear regularly from people in recovery who say to us that the constant bombardment of alcohol adverts and marketing in this country either leads me to drink more than I would have without it, or at times can even lead to people relapsing because they're going into supermarkets and they're going to get essential items like bread and milk, and they're passing by alcohol aisles, and it's unavoidable at times for people. So we're hearing anecdotally that it's a huge issue, and it's one of these things that people are actually having to adjust their day-to-day life. We've heard of people in early recovery saying, they couldn't even go for their weekly shop. They had to get their neighbour to do it because they were so worried that just by being in the same building that they sell alcohol that they would perhaps be triggered. So that's the kind of length we're talking about, of the kind of harm it causes. And like, let's be honest, alcohol companies are reliant upon dependent drinkers and those that drink large quantities to make a profit. It's the same with any other business. They're reliant upon people drinking as much as possible. And a lot of the adverts and marketing they do is targeted at recruiting the next wave, if you like, of people, dependent drinkers. And that's not even me speaking. That's the people in recovery who believe that and are quite cynical about some of the tactics that the alcohol industry use. So yeah, it's really interesting.
Minimum unit pricing. When did that get introduced in Scotland? You remember?
Yeah, so it got introduced in 2018, not too far before lockdown.
Yeah.
It got brought in originally at 50 pence per unit. And what happened is, obviously with the pandemic happening, people's drinking habits changed quite a lot. A lot of people were now drinking at home just because they couldn't drink in pubs and whatnot. So a lot of and obviously you've got like mental health issues, which were exacerbated a bit, obviously by the pandemic. So you had that. You had all these different areas that made it quite hard to really get a firm grasp on just how impactful minimum unit price was at that time. So many other factors. But what we have seen is that Public Health Scotland have, when they done a review of minimum unit price, they have estimated that it saves just under 160 lives per year through implementing minimum unit price. So we know it's effective. It was uprated last year to 65 pence per unit. Just obviously with it was felt that, as with any other product, it inflates over time, and what 50 pence is, a number of years ago won't be the same now. So we want to ensure that there's that kind of automatic uprating whereby the price continues to rise in line with sort of inflation and things like that. So that's been brought in, and I think it's important to say it was never brought in with the intention of just targeting one particular group of people or one particular part of the population. It was never just targeted at dependent drinkers to try and make dependent drinkers drink any less. It's this kind of whole population measure where we're bringing it in to try and prevent the younger generations from drinking quite so much. We're looking to maybe people who are starting to feel that starting to, become a bit dependent upon alcohol before they get to that stage, maybe reducing their consumption. And that was one of the purposes behind it. So yeah, I think that it's one of these things that quite often we hear some people say, it wouldn't have impacted me in recovery. I would have found a way to to buy alcohol. But again, it's not just for one particular group. This policy is for future generations kind of coming up. So it's a whole population approach.
And I don't want to put it on you for the answers, but was there a certain kind of demographic person that it did affect most? Was in the outcomes?
Yeah.
Was it?
Yeah, I don't think there's been as much. I could be wrong. I don't think there's been as much study looked into particular areas that it brought about the biggest improvement. But as I said, I think groups like those who were starting to drink perhaps more than they would have felt comfortable with, or were starting to become dependent upon alcohol. It was those sort of groups that we would perhaps foresee as having the biggest benefit on. So yeah, but it's all very well having these measures in place, but we need to be ensuring that the money that's raised from this is we're having people in recovery saying is we want it pumped back into services. We want it being able to help people who maybe are coming through behind us, who have maybe have similar struggles to what we've faced. And these services need money. Waiting times, things like that. These are all areas that we've heard people in recovery saying they'd like this money to be used for. If there is extra money to be made from alcohol.
So if you could just inform us, Mark, when we increase these minimum unit pricing, where is that additional money going? Is that going to the shops? Is that going into the public?
Yeah.
Where is that money going when they raise the rates?
So it goes to the retailer. So a big part of our involvement work has been speaking to people in recovery and asking them, well, firstly, what do you think of that money going to retailers? And secondly, is there somewhere you'd rather that money went to? And, almost unanimously, we've heard folks saying that shouldn't be going to retailers and it should be going to help folk who are struggling and can't access services. So that's another big area of our work, is trying to encourage that money to be put into areas where it's needed.
So how easy or hard is that to speak with a retailer and ask them to put their profit as such back into the kind of public purse?
Yeah, it's really difficult, and you're going against big organisations. These aren't small organisations, and your alcohol companies are also big companies. So it can be difficult to bring about these changes. But I think things like minimum unit price being brought in, and the success of that just shows that we can make these changes, and it is worthwhile trying to make these changes. And we're only making these changes because they're based upon what we're hearing from the recovery community anyway. They're not things we've just plucked out there. They're coming from the community. And I think having the weight of that community behind the message you're trying to make is one of the most important pieces of work we do, because we can't just go along and ask for these changes. We need people who are actually impacted by it to be, making the case for themselves.
Okay. And you spoke about there about kind of lockdown and COVID. Certainly, from my point of view, and Abbey Care and the kind of condition of people coming in to Abbey Care following lockdown, that there's certainly a huge kind of increase in kind of, you spoke about it, kind of drinking at home, daytime drinking, which has led for a lot of people, to kind of cross a line, regarding their alcohol intake. We've certainly seen that at Abbey Care and in the kind of recovery community as well regarding alcohol intake. Would that be fair to say that's what yourselves had been seeing maybe during or the years kind of following lockdown?
Yeah, I think we're still dealing with the fallout from it. And I think, as I was kind of talking about earlier on, I think it is one of the reasons why it was a bit more difficult to measure the success of minimum unit price during that period, because alcohol deaths did continue to rise, and unless we take action, that will continue to happen. We need to try and tackle these sort of things. But yeah, definitely, I think we're still not out of the woods in terms of how the pandemic changed people's drinking patterns. I think people just drinking in the house became a lot more regular thing. And when that happens, it's harder to, maybe keep tabs on just how much you're drinking because you're doing it in the house. And so yeah, there's so many different things that have came to kind of fall out of that different way we're drinking nowadays because of the pandemic.
Yeah. Then availability, what's the kind of work and what's the kind of information regarding availability? I know in my kind of limited knowledge regarding, Scotland's a wee bit different from when I lived down in England regarding kind of hours and times you can purchase alcohol, but also as well, kind of drinking in public and stuff like that. Scotland seems to have its own kind of laws based on maybe past problems with alcohol consumption.
So we've found that the neighbourhoods that have the highest amount of places to buy alcohol are also the neighbourhoods that have the highest amount of alcohol harm and kind of crime rates are at the highest.
Okay.
So there is this relationship between that the higher the amount of places to buy alcohol, the more likely are to see the problems that come from that. So things like just the sheer density and the number of places you can buy alcohol is a huge component when we speak about alcohol harm and trying to reduce that. And I think, to be quite honest, I think the amount of licensing applications that are just granted and doesn't appear to be a great deal of or questions asked about a lot of these applications. It's more often than not the past, despite objections to these sort of applications.
You see it yourself, don't you? You can get into any kind of housing scheme in Glasgow, and the shops will be made up of a carry-out shop, a news agent selling vapes, with a bookies next door, then a fast food takeaway next to that as well, and it's kind of a sad reflection, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Whose kind of final say is that? You go to more affluent areas, maybe out at Glasgow's West End, and you would walk forever to try and find a bookmakers or a news agent selling cigarettes and vapes and stuff like that. It's obviously the decisions are getting made not to put them in the affluent areas, but as you said there, it seems a pretty easy process to get that opened up in a less affluent area. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think increasingly what we're finding is that the places you can buy alcohol, those places now you can buy alcohol where years ago you would never have dreamt of. So even places like, like garages, you've got people giving you like a beer and stuff at the hairdressers, things like, places you never have dreamt of. So I think that, from my experience of going along to some of these like licensing board meetings where they're deciding upon applications, I've quite often seen people going along from like community councils and members of the public going along with what on the surface of it seems like really fair objections and issues with the license being granted. And it felt, certainly when I was there, that it wasn't really listened to as such, and it felt that the application was approved despite these objections. There's just over 16,000 places in Scotland you can buy alcohol, which is a huge number. And again, like, the alcohol industry is very much reliant upon people buying as much as they can, and that feeds into the amount of outlets. The more outlets, the more can be bought, and they're reliant upon large volumes of alcohol being purchased to thrive as a business. It comes down to.
So we're speaking there about availability as well. So Scotland's got, we hear a lot from maybe kind of clients in Abbey Care and stuff, and they speak about having to go to the shops before 10 o'clock in the morning so they're not tempted with alcohol being in sale. And like you spoke earlier around about the in-your-face kind of advertising when you walk into any supermarket and the positioning of the alcohol aisles. And the alcohol aisles seem to be eating more into the shop nowadays, don't they? And stuff like that. So what measures has Scotland put in place coming for a kind of harm reduction kind of place regarding opening hours, licensing hours and stuff like that, or marketing in shops?
Yeah, I think in terms of I'll touch upon the marketing one because we've seen that other countries like Ireland's a really good example where they have brought in measures within the retail environment to prevent folk who are maybe vulnerable, people in recovery perhaps, just walking through an alcohol aisle. So they've got things like what we call like structural separation.
Okay.
And that's where you've got that kind of physical separation of alcohol from like other products. They've got things like barriers at their alcohol aisles. So if you're a person in recovery, you know that the minute you go through those barriers that you are likely to be met with alcoholic products and marketing and advertising. So there's that kind of whole thing about consent. You know, you're going through the barriers, so you're consenting almost to
Okay.
being bombarded with it, if you like.
Mm.
So I think we can learn from other countries with measures like that. When we've been speaking to people in recovery and we've been, you know, telling them some of the examples of different countries, they've been really well received. A lot of people saying, you know, that would have really helped me. You know, it would have perhaps reduced the amount I drank, or at least would have let me know that I was, you know, going into an area of the shop that was, you know,
Yeah.
was going to be selling alcohol. So I think we've got a long way to go in terms of the alcohol marketing work, but I do think that these other countries could lend a really good example of how we could do it. So yeah, I think that's I don't think I think we've got a way to go with alcohol marketing. In terms of like licensing, again, I think that, you know, things like when we like the whole rules around when you can buy alcohol on like a Sunday and things, and quite simply put, if you limit the amount of hours that you can buy alcohol, there's less alcohol going to be consumed. I think that having that is key, but it's not going to, you know, having these times you can buy alcohol and also having limiting the amount of outlets on their own won't solve everything. The success of things like minimum unit price, which I've kind of spoken about, combined with, as I was talking about earlier, some of the restrictions that other countries have put in place with things like alcohol marketing. I think if you combine these things together, you start to see a big improvement in terms of and how things are looking in Scotland with regards to alcohol harm. But no one thing is going to solve everything, which is why we need to work across a number of different kind of measures. So that's kind of, I think in terms of successes, MUP, minimum unit price, is probably the biggest one, and having that pass and seeing it being successful.
And I think that's why the work that Alcohol Focus Scotland does is so valuable when we're speaking to maybe people in recovery, you know, regarding that's been their experience.
Yeah.
It's like anything else. We listen to the people who's got the experience of that and what they feel would be helpful. So I spoke with you earlier regarding this one. There's been a bit of significant difference regarding kind of advertisement, promotion of alcohol in Scottish football. I'm not sure how many years ago it was, but you had both Celtic and Rangers with tenants across our strip, the Bell, Scottish Premiership and stuff. Did something significant happen there regarding football, or was it just part of the natural kind of process regarding their highlighting maybe that isn't the best place to be advertising?
Yeah, so I think that naturally there's been a shift to other different types of companies sponsoring a lot of these clubs. I think especially in England, you're seeing a big rise in like gambling companies who are sponsoring these clubs. But I think we've always felt, especially in light of some of the numbers I spoke about today with alcohol harm and, you know, the amount of deaths that's caused by alcohol and the amount of different health conditions, that it seems like an odd time now for us to start to be looking at bringing alcohol back into football stadiums in Scotland and looking at that again. I think when on the backdrop of some of the numbers I spoke about, it just seems like a baffling time to even explore it. So yeah, I think that's what I would say around.
But it's that difference again, isn't it, in kind of society, you know, when maybe you could look at English football, who's well renowned for a lot of kind of crowd trouble and stuff like that. But yeah, you can it's freely available to buy alcohol there prior to the game, half time and stuff. But yeah, kind of Scotland's kind of experience is a total ban in alcohol across stadiums. Then we could look at rugby, where you can buy alcohol, you know, and it's just such a different kind of culture. And but you're right, like looking to bring that back in. But football clubs are now businesses, aren't they?
Yeah.
First and foremost, you
Yeah.
know, and it's about the match day experience and
Yeah.
a safe environment. So it is interesting. There's a lot of talk recently about kind of bringing that back into football as well.
I think as well, just to add
Yeah.
as well, it does seem quite odd as well to have this, this health harming product aligned with sport, which is all about, improving health and having the health benefits. So having those two things aligned does seem quite odd at times anyway, because they're quite contradictory to one another. So yeah, I take your point about rugby and being a bit different from football, but I just think in general having those two things aligned is quite a bit of a contradiction.
And I do have to say as well that the more and more kind of football clubs as well are starting to do a lot more kind of community work regarding kind of addiction and stuff like that as well. You know, we've just recently started a project with St Mirren Football Club, you know, and who do a lot of great work for the community there and have got a vested interest in helping people come through their doors. Okay, what is there any other kind of certain groups of people that you've been discussing drinking trends with recently?
Yeah, so we've done a wee bit of work around speaking to people within the LGBT plus community,
Okay.
because we want to try and build up as wide and vast a picture of different groups' experiences around alcohol harm, because it's not going to be the same for everyone.
Yeah.
So there's different struggles, I would say, from what we've heard within the LGBT plus community, and what we hear is around this whole rainbow washing and pink washing of like pubs and clubs. So, sticking a rainbow on a product and suddenly you become like some LGBT plus ally, using like pink washing and rainbow washing to sell product, and to try and align yourself with some of these communities. So we've been speaking to LGBT plus communities around some of their experiences, and kind of what we've been hearing is just how central a part alcohol plays to their social experience. When it comes to things like Pride, quite often Pride are sponsored by alcohol companies,
Okay.
and the whole thing just becomes about alcohol. So there's then, if you are, somebody within that community who maybe doesn't want to drink, it can be quite hard to be part of that community whilst everyone else around you is drinking, and that can cause some difficulties as well. So we recently produced a report based on the LGBT plus community's experiences around alcohol marketing, which is really interesting. Just how things you wouldn't necessarily think about that are just different, perhaps, from the rest of the population. So yeah, that's another group we've been working with. Young people as well is a huge component of our work, because we speak to people in recovery. But I think that speaking to younger people has been really eye-opening, and just going along to groups with younger people and just finding out exactly just how much they know about alcohol has been pretty startling. They know about brands that I wasn't even aware of.
Yeah.
They know so much about alcohol. And I think that one of the things that's probably been the saddest and most eye-opening in terms of speaking to younger people is just how resigned and to alcohol they are, being part of society every day, whether that's, walking across broken glass, or whether that's seeing somebody being sick in the street, or somebody acting up because they're drunk. They're just so used to it. So there's not even this, it harms me or it's a problem from children. It's more just like, oh, this is the way it is, so I just accept it.
Okay.
But yeah, it's the impact on young people's a really big part of our work, and trying to find out, what would help young people, what would ensure that maybe as they grow up, they wouldn't be exposed to a lot of these kind of alcohol harms that we have spoke about for the kind of generation coming up.
Yeah. We kind of spoke earlier as well, Mark, about maybe a bit of a difference in their kind of drinking patterns. Younger people nowadays, it's maybe
Yeah.
not as regular that they're drinking, but when they are drinking, then they're
Yeah.
consuming far more.
I think just with like online and there being that push with younger people these days around like fitness and perhaps taking care of your health a bit more,
Yeah.
that's been great, and it's perhaps maybe led to folk drinking. I don't know, a bit less, but certainly we know that that binge drinking still exists in younger people. So
Yeah. I was going to ask you, it's not something we could have discussed or planned to discuss, but do you do work regarding kind of stigma and
yeah,
any findings of that? Are people more open? We've spoke about it a few times in this show, you know, because of maybe platforms like this, social media. You go into any social media and people are on there speaking about their recovery or their sobriety and what to do, and you
yeah.
know, some good information and some not so good information. Are people more open now regarding their alcohol consumption, or maybe having issues with alcohol that they don't feel stigmatized, or it feels as if they've got nowhere to turn? Are we getting any findings in
Yeah.
that?
So I could probably talk a bit about the sessions I've been along to in over the last few years and the work I've done with people in recovery. So I think that stigma, unfortunately, still very much exists. I'd like to say it doesn't, but it very much exists, and that's kind of seen across a number of different areas when it comes to the folk we've been speaking to. So whether it's access and services, and the way they're viewed, and even at times spoken to when they disclose the fact that they may be uh, are dependent on alcohol, at times completely changes the whole tone of the
Yeah,
conversation. So that's quite sad to hear. Stigma as well, and just the fact that a lot of the people we speak to, talk about how they still feel that shame to disclose some of their issues.
yeah,
Um, but I think that, yeah, unfortunately, it's still very much there. And I think that going along to the groups, it's like it's always really, I'm always really privileged to hear some of the stories I hear, because these are people sharing some really, at times, heartbreaking stuff around the harms that alcohol has caused them. So
yeah,
I'm really privileged that they're able to share that. And hopefully some of the things that we hear from the groups we go along to will help to make change in this country when it comes to speaking to decision makers. But no, stigma's still very much there, and even some of the language that's used in this country when it comes to alcohol and people who drink alcohol can be stigmatizing in itself,
yeah.
with some of the terms we use. But yeah, still there.
So through your experience, Mark, in the work that you do, is there a certain area of people that's more likely to become dependent to alcohol, to experience alcohol harms, health issues,
Yeah.
mental health issues?
Yeah. So I'd probably start off by saying that, like, everyone, the minute you drink alcohol, there's always a chance it will cause some sort of harm.
Yeah,
Um, but there is, it's been found that people in the more deprived areas of Scotland are 4 times more likely to die from issues around
okay,
alcohol specifically. And they are 7 times more likely to be hospitalised as a result of alcohol. Um, so I'd say that people in more deprived areas are 4 times more likely in terms of deaths, and 7 times more likely in terms of hospital admissions to suffer at the hands of alcohol harms. But I think everyone's it's possible for anyone to be harmed by alcohol, really, even for a young person, or
yeah.
a person living with someone who's dependent on alcohol.
Do you think a factor in that is maybe people maybe from more affluent areas have better access to healthcare, and can maybe get those issues addressed kind of earlier
Yeah,
than those in more deprived areas as well?
yeah, quite possibly, and just maybe that access to information and
Yeah,
and things like that. But I do think we need to, like, going back to the stigma part. I think we need to step away from this. What does a person who's dependent on alcohol look like, and that stereotypical image that a lot of people have, and anyone can become dependent upon alcohol, whether you live in a deprived area or a more affluent area. So yeah, just trying to come away from that image of what we would perceive as somebody who's got issues around alcohol is important.
so we spoke earlier about the minimum pricing been a success, you
Yep.
know, saving 150 lives a year,
Oh, yeah.
I reckon.
Yep.
What other areas that's been implemented over the years through your knowledge do you believe has worked to help kind of save lives regarding alcohol?
I think things as well, just, things like the training we've done in the past, and a lot of people just don't realise how little they know about alcohol until, we go out and tell them about alcohol, because you wouldn't,
Okay.
it's not necessarily something you go out and actively research or look into. But I think things like that, just awareness raising through like our training and things like that, have really had, I think, a positive impact. But as I was saying earlier, I think all these things need to happen in unison to
Yeah.
have a proper impact. It can't just be reliant upon one thing. And I suppose that's one of the biggest things we hear at times with minimum unit prices. Increasing the price of alcohol isn't going to solve everything, and it was never intended to solve everything. It was one of a kind of package of different tools we've got to kind of reduce alcohol harm.
Yeah. So for anybody listen, Mark, how could people get involved in the work that you do at Alcohol Focus Scotland? Whether that be people in services, whether that be for individuals, how would people get involved?
Yeah, so there's a number of different ways to get involved, and it's worth saying that people can be involved as much or as little as they want. So they can, provide their story or their experiences on a particular topic if they like, or they could become a more kind of ongoing. They could work with us on a more sort of ongoing basis, and they can be, like media spokespeople. They can be people that we maybe call upon to, if we have like press requests for like quotes and things like that, and to share their experiences. So you can hop in and out, if you like, of our involvement work.
Yeah.
And really it's for people who just have opinions around some of the things we've spoken about, whether they've been directly impacted themselves, or whether it's perhaps a loved one who's been impacted. We kind of want to hear your story, because it's the only way that positive change is going to happen in this country, is by sharing the kind of lived experience and the kind of hearts and mind stuff, because there's only so far numbers can take you in making change. You need to hear that kind of quantitative, hearts and mind stories, I think. So yeah, I would encourage people to, go to our website, Alcohol Focus Scotland .org.uk. Let me double check that. So yeah, to go to our website, and on there you can find out more information about how you can be involved in our sort of campaigning work. But yeah, I think it's important, because the amount of resource that the alcohol industry has got behind them is vast, and really, as I keep saying, all their activities around different areas such as marketing is geared towards consumption and increasing consumption. So we really need to counter that by having as much support on these various different issues as possible, to inform decision makers. That's the only way we're going to be able to do it, I think.
And over your time working in this field, has there been any like kind of companies, alcohol companies that's listened, provided kind of support and put money back into maybe people's recovery or any kind of community help?
The main sort of things, to my knowledge, in terms of interactions with such companies, are really, I think, to be battling some of the, the policy stuff we're trying to bring through. So like minimum unit price, for example, was a battle with, the drink industry in terms of trying to pass that through. But it's difficult because, the cynic in me would say that any of these measures that the drink company are trying to take, to whether it be put money back in or provide training, or is all ultimately geared around the fact that it's a profit-making company.
Yeah.
So the motives maybe need to be, looked into as to why they're doing certain things and why they would provide money. Yeah, because as far as I'm aware, there's not been a great deal of support from the drink industry for a lot of the measures we've been looking to bring in. So, yeah, that's probably what I'd say around that.
for kind of people listening to the podcast, or maybe people in recovery or whatever, what could we do as individuals to kind of help out regarding kind of Scotland's relationship with alcohol, or getting involved in alcohol focus, or passing on information? What can people do?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's important to say that we need to move away from this. The way we see it at the moment, I think, which is about this, it's their fault, or it's up to them completely to not drink and things like that. And that sort of putting all the responsibility on the individual. I think we need to move away from that and acknowledge that there is a concerted effort from the drink industry to make people drink as much as possible. And, you know, for all the will in the world, a lot of these marketing campaigns are really hard to resist for some people. They paint this picture of, you know, being happy if you were to drink, and being able to have a good time, and not, you know, if you don't drink, you won't have a good time sort of imagery. So we need to move away from that personal responsibility on individuals. But at the same time, I think it's important that people have access to, you know, information around alcohol, finding out just some of the ways it can harm you. And even things like knowing what's in alcohol is an important thing. So knowing exactly what is in the product you're drinking is a big thing, which is actually lacking a fair bit at the moment. But yeah, I think just, you know, accessing, you know, our website is full of great resources. And if it's in terms of services and things, we can signpost and things like that, because obviously we don't provide services, but we can we obviously have a lot of contacts in terms of services and things that we could perhaps suggest. But I think awareness raising, I think education is huge. People just knowing that if they choose to drink, here's some of the ways it could impact you, and having that informed decision is vital, I think. Yeah.
And I think you're right in what you're saying there, Mark. There's no point putting the emphasis on the individuals, is it? People need to get together, you know, whether that be people with kind of experience in recovery, the drinks companies themselves, places like yourself, and get round table and speak about what's best for society, you know. But sometimes, as you said, when it comes to business, profit can come before that, but to what cost, you know, and our health system, what cost to families, you know, that kind of fallout from that, you know.
It goes back to the stigma point as well, about we have this idea in our head around, you know, people need to help themselves completely, and it's up to them to, you know, to be responsible enough to not drink. And it's attitudes like that are really not helping us in this country. And we need to realise that there is other things at play, and that you know, people are being encouraged to drink as much as possible, really. So it is difficult to be in recovery and continue a recovery journey when all that's going on. So yeah, it's really important. And even just for, as I said earlier, the kind of upcoming generations, you know, people in recovery's views and experiences are just as important for, you know, future generations as it is today. So that's another big reason why we would love to hear from folk.
Thank you, Mark. So every show, Mark, we ask the guest to pick 3 significant songs, not necessarily their 3 favourite songs, but 3 significant songs from their life. So your first one is My Girl by The Temptations. Do you want to tell us a wee bit why that song's got so much significance to you?
Yeah, my dad's and continues to be a big karaoke singer. When I was younger, I always get budged up to try and sing, and it was always that song for some reason I sang. So it's got some really good memories. So yeah, that's probably that was one of the songs that sprang to mind and brings a smile on my face when I hear it.
Brilliant. Song number 2, old classic, Wish You Were Here by Pink Floyd.
There's a theme here. My dad used to play this a lot, and it was one of the first albums Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon was one of the first albums I listened to. It really opened my eyes up to just how expressive music can be. So that song's massive for me, and as I said, it was played in house quite a lot when I was younger, so holds good memories.
And the final song, Could You Be Loved by Bob Marley.
Again, brings similar memories of being younger. All these are from when I was younger. my adult time has been a happy time as well, I promise. But I just good memories of that being played a lot around the house, and just some really good energy around the house when that was on. So that's probably my 3 songs that got my mind.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Mark, for coming on the show and sharing with us regarding the great work
Thank you.
that Alcohol Focus Scotland does. Thank you.